Now, our next guest, very honored to introduce these two gentlemen with us. And so at this time, I want to welcome to the stage, tied to the Hope Global Forum's On the Record, we have the Fortune CEO, Alan Murray, and CBS News contributor and former White House Chief of Staff, the Honorable Mick Mulvaney. Let's invite them to the stage at this time. Give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mick, good to be with you. I can't believe we're allowed to be out here unsupervised.
No, he'll be up here eventually.
John O'Brien. Oh, he's
there.
there.
He is. All right, there he is.
So you guys are funny. I'm just constantly amused. I'm constantly amused by like the audience. Like, you guys are hilarious. You hear this, not just White House Chief of Staff, and you're like, yeah. Do you know who he was Chief of Staff for? This is going to be one of the most interesting conversations you have ever heard in your life. We have brought Mick Mulvaney to this conversation. Last night, who we have? From the political, Senator Raphael Warnock, who I guess you might call part of the Democratic, some would say liberal wing, maybe, Democratic Party. So now we have the Republican conversation represented. But Mick Mulvaney was the Chief of Staff, and I don't normally say this name, for President Donald Trump. This is not a joke. This is a serious conversation. Listen to me now. This is what Andrew Young, the quote he loves of mine the most. Listen without being defensive. Talk without being offensive. And always leave even your adversary with their dignity. Because if you don't, they'll spend the rest of their life trying to make you miserable. We have got to find common ground. So, ladies and gentlemen, it took a lot of courage for Mick Mulvaney to fly into the moral capital of America, Atlanta, to come talk to a bunch of black and brown folks and other folks and trust the conversation. Can he trust us? Join me in welcoming Alan and Mick.
You're going to let me do this.
Why do I get the feeling he'll be back before this is over?
I suspect he will.
I think that's probably true.
Let's just guess when he'll intervene. So let's look. You were, as John said, you were head of the budget office. You were chief of staff. You were there for the whole 4 years. You were envoy to Northern Ireland. On January 7th, you quit.
Actually, the night of the 6th, but yeah.
The night of the 6th, you quit. So what did you learn about Donald Trump on January 6th that you didn't learn in the 4 years leading up to January 6th?
Yeah. I quit. I quit for a reason, and I'm probably not the only person in the room who has quit a job for this reason. I quit a job because my boss didn't live up to my expectations of his performance. And we talk a little bit more about the January 6th committee if you want to later. But on the day of the riots is the day that the president needs to be the president and needs to be the most presidential. And he wasn't. He failed miserably at that. You can talk there's all sorts of disagreements about what happened before the riots. I'm talking about now during the riots. I know what was happening. I was in Washington, D.C. I was actually in the building that morning. I had wanted to go and see the vote, and it's a long story as to why I wasn't there. But then I'm watching the riots on TV, and my stomach is sinking, and I'm waiting for the president to go on TV to fix this, and he wouldn't do it for 3 or 4 hours. And then I saw him go on camera in the Rose Garden. I actually tweeted that I thought he should go speak to the nation, and someone must have gotten to him, and he did go speak to the nation from the Rose Garden, and I could tell from listening to him that he didn't believe what he was saying.
Yeah.
And that's when I'm like, okay, I'm out. And I called Mike Pompeo that night and said, look, that's not, he said, that's fine, send me a note, and I did.
But let's spend a little time talking about what happened in the 4 years leading up to that, because, look, I'm not a partisan. There are a few partisans in this audience, I can tell from the response. I'm not a partisan. My presidential voting record is like a broken electrocardiogram. But I didn't vote for Donald Trump. And I didn't, as a lifelong journalist, I didn't vote for Donald Trump because every day he would come out and say 5 or 6 things that just weren't true. And I'd covered presidents for 30 years, and they all had, even Bill Clinton, when he wagged his finger at us and said, I did not have sex with that woman, he at least took the trouble to go to the dictionary and look up the definition of sex. And he goes, well, that's not what I did. So,
But he didn't go look up the definition of the word is, as I recall. So
yeah. But so how did you feel about Donald Trump's relationship with the truth?
I had seen things, of course, when you work with somebody all of the time, you see stuff that other people don't see. And I got to learn how Donald Trump thinks, especially when it comes to facts. I don't know if y'all remember the book, The Power of Positive Thinking. It was written by a guy named, I think, Norman Vincent Peale.
Norman Vincent Peale, of course.
That was Trump's pastor. That's what he grew up on. That's his worldview, is the power of positive thinking. And it's a challenge for a chief of staff, because part of my job is to go to him and say, now, boss, we got a problem with this. Don't say that. Don't say that. Why would you say that? Well, because this could go wrong. No. Don't say that. If you say it, it could happen. Okay? He really believes in self-actualization to success, and it's worked for him. So what I noticed about him, for example, in COVID, is that he would come in, we have a 2-hour meeting at the early days of COVID, and they'd lay all of these facts out. And one of them was that this is a coronavirus, and coronaviruses, we know typically they don't do as well in warm temperatures as they do in the cold. And that's the fact he picked up on. That was, out of the 2 hours, that's what he took, and he said, okay, I'm gonna go in front of the cameras and say it's going away in the summertime, right?
So it wasn't resistance to facts, it was very selective. In your view.
It was the stuff that aligned with where he thought he was going. You don't look backwards, you look forward, you pick the facts that are convenient to you, and you move forward. So it's not that he was anti-fact or anti-truth, he was just selective in what he focused on.
Was there another moment? These decisions are very personal, and look, you were serving the nation, and I was personally pleased when I saw you were going in. I said, well, here's a good guy. We need good guys in the government.
Yeah.
Was there ever a moment in those 4 years where you said, I don't think I can do this any longer?
No, there was never a moment. He never asked me to do anything illegal, and he never asked me to do anything immoral. Are there times when I was in a meeting with him and I saw him treat somebody a way that I would not, or I saw him do something a way that I would not? Yeah, we've all done that. But what you have to realize is when you're working for the President of the United States and you're chief of staff, you're chief of staff. You're not chief of the president. Your name is not on the ballot. And if you really feel like you can't work there, you should quit. But the reason you're there is to try to make that person as successful as you can. And again, never asked me to do anything illegal, never asked me to do anything immoral. So no, I didn't struggle with that. I struggle, for example, I'm a lot more fiscally conservative than he is. And we
He was spending a lot of money.
He spent a lot more money than I was ever comfortable with. And people say, how do you tolerate that? I said, well, at least I was in the room and I get a chance to make my argument. And if I'm over there, then no one's making those arguments. You feel like you have some ownership in some of the decision making, and you maybe move the needle a little way in the right direction. That's not bad.
The moment that caused a break for a lot of people was Charlottesville.
Oh yeah, yeah.
When you had the riots in Charlottesville, the obvious race motivation behind many of the rioters, and when he came out the next day and said there were good people on both sides,
right?
Didn't take a strong stand against what happened.
Two stories about that. One is an anecdote, because I went on TV right after that. I was on TV on Sunday after Charlottesville, after the press conference, actually. We had a press conference in New York that was supposed to be about infrastructure, and since that was a budgetary issue, I was there. But they put me on TV on Sunday to talk a little bit about Charlottesville. When it was over, I'm walking down the hallway. I can't remember where I was, CBS, CNN, something like that. This very large African-American guy came running down the hallway after me, calling out, Miss Mulvaney, I want to talk to you for a second. I had no idea where this conversation was going to go. And I said, yes, sir. And he says, are you going to see the president later today? And I said, yeah, I am. So I want you to tell him something for me. And I'm like, what is that? He goes, you tell him that I said hello, and that I always enjoyed working for him, and I've always thought he was a good man. You tell him Ronaldo said hello. And I said, Ronaldo, how do you know the President of the United States? He says, I was the cameraman on The Apprentice for 8 years. I've never had a boss treat me better than he did. I worked for him again. Anytime I got to, I want you to tell him I said, hey.
But that doesn't explain the ambivalent response to Charlottesville.
It doesn't. I'm going to get to that in a second. But what it does is when people ask me, is Donald Trump a racist? I don't know, but when you have that data point, it's something that the public doesn't see that has to go through your thinking. On Charlottesville specifically, I was not in the White House at the time. I was at the Office of Management and Budget, but I do remember being up, like I said, in New York for the press conference. And my guess is, and it's an educated guess, is that Donald Trump had a 2-hour briefing on Charlottesville. And one of the things he said is, well, there was a group there that's Sons of Confederate Veterans, and they were there to sort of defend the statues. And Trump goes, I know those folks. I know those are good folks. That was the one fact he took. That was it. Out of the 2 hours, out of all of the bad, he took the good that he had in his head, and that was the fact that he ran with. And that was the genesis of that line.
So the good folks on both sides meant there were some people who believed the statues should stay. But that sort of missed the point of the
It misses a lot of points. It misses a lot of points. It does. And by the way, it's not a worldview that I profess to. To get a 2-hour briefing on anything, and you know what you want to believe going in, and you take one fact that backs that up, that probably leads to really, really bad decision making.
It's not a great way to run the country.
It's not a great way to do anything. But we're going to talk about that in a second, about where we are as a society. Well, do we watch the news to get facts, or do we watch the news to be affirmed in what we already think we believe and know to be right? So that's
let's go there. Let's go there. I mean, the theme of this event is bridging the divide. How did we get to this place? I mean, it has gotten just almost impossible to have common conversations across the divide. I mean, obviously, we have moments in our history, you know, we did have a civil war, but it's probably as bad as it's been since then, right now. How did we get here?
I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that question, jump up and scream it out. I think it's a combination of things. We lack commonality. The institutions that used to unite us are no longer there. Something as simple as television. We used to have 3 channels, and pretty much all of us would watch the same thing, and now that's not the case. Social media absolutely contributes to ripping us apart. The anonymity in social media. If you want to see something really heinous, go to any politician of either side. Go to their Twitter page and read the comments. And then ask yourself, if you've ever spoken like that to anybody else face to face in your life, the answer is probably no, if you're a decent human being. But that's on Twitter every single day.
You think social media is a force for bad in the world?
I think it can be a force. It's like anything else. It could be a bunch of different things. But I absolutely think it contributes to ripping us apart.
Is there a regulatory role to rein that in?
For those of you who aren't aware of this, the social media companies get a protection that your magazine doesn't get. If Alan prints something in the newspaper in his magazine about me that's completely false and defamatory, okay, I can sue him for that. He's published something about me that is false, and even if it's egregious enough as a public figure, I can sue him for defamation. I can't sue Google. Google could put the exact same thing, or Facebook put the exact same thing on their websites, the exact same wrong factual allegation about me, and I can't sue them. We gave that protection to the social media companies decades ago. I think it's called Section 230. And they're essentially not deemed to be publishers. Their attitude was, look, we're just a bulletin board. We're a bulletin board at a college university.
But we know that's outrageous.
And it used to be right, but now it's outrageous.
Will it change? Will Congress take it on?
I think they probably will. There's very few groups in Washington, D.C. that don't have any friends right now. China is one, corporate America is another, and big tech is a third.
But your beef is not just with social media. I mean, you are a CBS contributor now, but you're not too happy with the whole press establishment.
I don't think the press is interested in educating us. I think they're interested in entertaining us. I had a conversation with a friend of mine.
So we got to beat up on the press a little bit.
Yeah. I had a conversation with a friend of mine when my successor, Mark Meadows, got a criminal referral from the January 6th committee to the FBI. I was watching a network that I don't ordinarily watch. I don't watch much TV. And that network didn't mention it all day, not one time, that the former chief of staff had been criminally referred to the FBI. This hasn't happened, I don't think, since Nixon. So I called a friend of mine who works for that network, and I'm like, look, I'd be happy to come on your show. I'm the former chief of staff, and we talk a little bit about this. He's like, yeah, you know, Mick, we gave that some thought, and we don't think it's what the audience wants to hear. I said, I got news for you. If you're in the business of telling people what they want to hear, you're in the entertainment business. That's what the Marvel movies are about. That's what Star Wars is about. If you're in the business of telling people facts that might make them uncomfortable, that's the news business. And it's not, listen, it's not Fox is biased one way, MSNBC is biased another. The biggest struggle I have as a private citizen now is where do I get my information? And where can I get information that I actually rely on? It's really hard to do. And what you'll sort of have to do is get it from a bunch of different sources and try and find the common elements, you know, get something from MSNBC, get something from Fox, and figure, well, the truth must be someplace in the middle, because neither of them are telling you it very often.
But we haven't trained people to do that. Most people don't know how to do what you do, to be discriminating readers of stuff from all over the place.
It's really hard. Can I tell my CBS story?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So I got asked early on in my time at the network to weigh in on a phone conversation about something. It was a story about the White House, okay, something I know a little bit about. It was a story about the call logs on January 6th. You may remember this story, that they were going to break a story in the Washington Post that said that the call logs from January 6th, the records of the phone conversations had been edited, had been redacted, had been sort of, things had been taken out of it. And this was the Nixon-esque moment, okay? And this was going to be a big story. And they finally get around to me and ask me for my comment. I'm like, yeah, you've only got one call log. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, this is how it works. If the president's in the residence and he picks up the phone, that goes to that operator switchboard, and that ends up on a call log. And you have that call log, and it shows calls, right? If he comes down out of the residence and goes into the Oval Office and picks up the phone, that goes over here to a different operator desk, and it goes on a different call log. You have one, but you don't have the other one. The reason you have a gap from 11 a.m. until about 7 p.m. is because that's when the president typically came downstairs. He'd come downstairs every day about 11, work until 7, then go back up unless we had dinner or something like that. And so if you want to know what's in that gap, go get the other call log.
Wrong log.
They'll give it to you, right? There was dead silence on the phone. And the reporter goes, we stand by the story. And I'm like, what does that mean? He said, no, we're going to run the story as is. And I'm like, but it's wrong. And I said, no, not wrong. There's not a single thing in our story that is not factually accurate. And I said, you know what, you're absolutely right. Everything you're printing is 100% factually accurate, and the entire thing is entirely misleading. I've just told you how to actually fix this, and you refuse to do it. They said, we're sticking with the story. By the way, CNN, 3 or 4 days later, actually ran the story about the other call log. Okay? Didn't get nearly the attention that the first story got, which is often the case.
Well, I would never defend that. And look, you're talking about divided media, divided social media.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I spent a couple of years, before I went to Fortune, I spent a couple of years running the Pew Research Center. And we did a big oversample survey of political attitudes. This was maybe 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And one of the questions we asked Americans was, if you have a scale from 0 to 100, and 0 is you side with the Democrats in Congress on everything, and 100 is you side with the Republicans in Congress on everything. Generally speaking, on most policies, where would you like the debate to end up? The majority of Americans put it right smack in the middle, 50-50. They don't want this. This is not what they voted for. The votes tend to happen in primaries, not in general elections. So bridging the divide, the theme of this Congress, is what most Americans want. Why don't they get it?
Then why do they elect Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Well, but it's a tiny minority that elects. It's a tiny minority. It's primary voters. The people who vote in general elections, I mean, Georgia was an exception. Most of the people who vote in general elections, their votes don't count because it's happening in a primary.
The primary system is absolutely broken. There's no question about it. But the government reflects the nation. It does. There is no magical force in Washington, D.C. that says, send me Marjorie Taylor Greene and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Okay? These are not serious people. They're not interested in being lawmakers. They're not interested in being legislature. They're interested in being outrageous and notorious and famous, and at some point they will become rich because of it. Okay? But there's nobody in Washington bringing them. There's folks here and there and everywhere sending those folks. But you're right, the primary system does.
Yeah, we've started to see some reforms in the primary system that seem to be making a difference. In Alaska this year, The election, it was an open primary. You take the top 5. You have ranked choice voting. So you not only give your first choice, you give your second choice and your third choice. Lisa Murkowski says it changed the nature of the campaign because you weren't just talking to the passionate few that elect Marjorie Taylor Greene. You were talking to everybody because a second choice vote could count. Do you think there's a way to fix politics so that we can have sensible civil conversations in Washington?
You can fix the primary system, but primary system does absolutely contribute to the extremes from both parties going up. There's absolutely no question about it. There's things you can do to fix that. I know ranked choice voting is hot right now. I've never liked it because it's a little bit confusing. Keep in mind, districts are not constitutionally required. You don't have to have districts. South Carolina gets 7 seats in Congress, and we can allocate those statewide. We can do by district. There's a bunch of things you can do. But really, to fix it, you've got to fix the nation, because government's going to reflect the people, and it should. Government's going to lead on a couple of things, but generally government follows. So you have to fix this before you fix that, and that's a bigger challenge.
I want to talk about the role.
Thank you to the one person who.
Yeah, you got an applause over there. Stand up. No, there's some more. I want to talk about the role of business in politics because it's changed, and I can say this as somebody who's reported on business for the last 40 years. It's changed pretty dramatically in the last 10 years. Used to be any business leader would say, "Hey, if it doesn't directly affect my bottom line, I'm not going to talk about it."
Yep.
And now in the last 10 years, it kind of started with Mark Benioff objecting to the religious liberties law in Indiana, but you had Bank of America objecting to state of North Carolina transgender access to bathrooms.
Yep.
You've had CEOs get involved in guns. Here in Atlanta, you had Ed Bastian, who was just on the stage, and James Quincy from Coca-Cola object to the voting rights law. Businesses are, in part because their employers are pushing them to, are getting much more active in the issues that motivate politics. Good thing or bad thing?
Troubling for them, because once you start picking, isn't everything politicized already? I got asked the other day about the World Cup soccer match in Qatar, and I'm like, look, can I leave politics aside for a little bit and just enjoy the sports? I get sports washing. I understand the LGBTQ issues, but I can't stand the politicization of everything. And I don't want to make my decision on whether or not my kids go to Disney World or they fly a particular airline or they buy a particular soda pop based upon what the politics of that company is. I don't know if it's healthy for the community. It just continues to divide us.
But Mick, I don't think that's. I am fortunate in my job to talk to a lot of these CEOs. Their preference is to stay as far away from politics as they possibly can. I don't think that's what's driving it. I think what's driving it is they're saying, hey, in today's world, we've got to have access to a talented and diverse workforce or we won't do well. So we have to stand up for the rights of people who are being disadvantaged. And in today's world, I mean, that's what Ed Bastian said on stage here just a little while ago. And if we're heading towards a serious climate crisis, we as business leaders have to take action to head that off. Not because it's political, but because our long-term existence depends on it. So
my only advice, and I advise corporations on this all the time, is if you're going to get involved in politics, you better be good at it. You need to be at least as good as politics as you are as your underlying business, or else you're going to get your ass kicked, because it's a nasty business. And if you're not any good at politics, you stand to make some mistakes. You can make.
You think Ed Bastian and James Quincy were wrong to get involved in the voting rights issue here in Atlanta?
I look at it this way. We'll pick somebody who's not here. I think Disney made a mistake in how they handled that, and I think it's been reflected in the corporate leadership and so forth. It's tough. You can do it. Listen, I believe that corporations have free speech rights. I absolutely believe that. Corporation is nothing more than an association of people. We have these rights. But if you're going to, as a corporation, if you're going to do it, you better be good at it, or else it could come back to haunt you.
Last question here. The one thing we can all agree on, you can agree on, I can agree on, everybody in this room can agree on, is where we are right now is not good. Mm-hmm. We have to be able to have civil discourse about important issues in this country, or we will fail as a country. What's your best advice to people in this room on how to deal with this critical problem?
I got asked to go give a speech in Boston, Massachusetts for a large corporation, and they said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to do a discussion on civil discourse. I said, how would you do that? I said, well, I'm going to get Joe Kennedy. Joe's a Democrat, former member of Congress, friend of mine. We've agreed on some things, we disagree on a lot of things. We want to come up on stage and talk about what it's like to be in Washington, D.C., and how we can learn to disagree without being disagreeable, okay? That was my pitch. They called back and said, we can't let you do that. I'm like, why not? Well, that's too political. The left-leaning people don't want you on stage, and the right-leaning people don't want him on stage. And so my message to you is, if we're going to fix this, we at least have to be able to talk about it. That's why I'm glad to be here and glad that John invited me to do this. Because if you're not able to even talk to people that you disagree with, that is a real challenge that we have moving forward. I worry more about it with the young people. And I don't have time to tell the story now because we're out of time. But I think, especially when it comes to the younger generation, I know old people have made a living out of complaining about young people for a long time. But I do a lot of work with college groups. They don't want to talk to people who disagree with them. They don't want to be in the same room with people who disagree with them. They don't want to socialize with people who disagree with them. By the way, this is on the left and the right. They're moving into camps at 16, 17, 18 years old because they think they know what's right. They're not interested in being educated, not interested in learning. They're interested in being reaffirmed in what they already believe. And they're afraid to deal with people who they disagree with. And that needs to be
good advice, good advice. And thank you for
Thanks,
being
Al.
here. Thanks.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you.
So come here, you two. So I think this is one of the most courageous conversations that we've had. And I was just here, you know of Alan Murray because he's CEO of Fortune magazine, I think one of the most prestigious and important magazines for business in the world. And it's nice to see Alan and Fortune leading into these issues. They don't have to. They were here just last week during their social impact conference, which Ambassador Young, myself, Bernice A. King, and others spoke at. So Alan, thank you for your leadership. Mick, this was an even, as I mentioned earlier, a heavier lift for him. And I have something to acknowledge. People give me a lot of credit for being open. I talk to everybody. I didn't want to talk to Mick.
They didn't give me a choice.
No, just real talk. Like, I've known 8 presidents. I've been honored by 5. I've served 3 from both parties. I consider myself open. I just had no interest in talking to the chief of staff of a certain former president. And I was told by the producer of Squawk Box, Max
Quayle.
No, Max Myers.
Max Myers, to shut up and listen. He said, John, you got Mick wrong. Then I was told by Jay Clayton, former SEC chairman, John, shut up, I love you. You've got Mick wrong. And then I heard a third friend say something similar. You just need to talk to him. We did Squawk Box together.
A couple times.
And I didn't throw up.
I started wearing vests.
He started, in fact,
That's right.
we started a text love affair between each other, a love of the heart. He would send me notes. I would send him notes. He would compliment me on what I was wearing. I wrote on one note, 2020, July, you are good today, Mick. Always good to be with you. You might just prove we can disagree without being disagreeable. Yeah. He says, response, I agree 100%. Not enough people these days get that, it seems. I was wrong about Mick Mulvaney. He's a decent man. He's a good man. We all make mistakes. Life is tennis.
You didn't say that.
Including me. I made a mistake on him. He made a mistake about somebody else.
Say it again.
I made mistakes.
All right.
But a saint is a sinner that got up. We're all angels with dirty faces. Life is 10% what life does to you, and 90% how you choose to respond to it. We need to learn, all of us, to stop reacting and start responding. And we need to cut people a break for this reason, if no other reason only. Somebody once told me, Mick, grace is when some SOB does not get the rear end whipping they so rightly deserve. Or mercy is, I'm sorry. And grace is when you and I get the love and opportunity that we don't deserve. I'll say it again. Mercy is when somebody who's horrible does not get the rear end whipping they so rightly deserve. And grace is when you and I get the love and opportunity we don't deserve. If you want to have a little grace, you need to show a little mercy.
Practice a little mercy.
We all can be nicer to each other. Please say thank you to Mick Mulvaney.
Appreciate it. Doing this. Really appreciate it.
Great job, Jimmy. Great job.